Hello. Glad you could join us. What you're about to hear is not financial advice, legal counsel, or investment instruction. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are only those of the hosts and guests and do not comprise professional advice. Due Dilly follows where money flows and what is impacted because of it. You'll hear references to things that will always be available in the show description or episode notes for you to dive deeper into and check out. Enjoy the show.
What's good, y'all? I'm Carl,
I'm Jonathan.
and this is Due Dilly. We want to welcome y'all back. We're doing episode 2 right now. IP over everything. How to protect what you make. Want to give y'all some context around who we are. I'm Carl Joseph Black. I'm an attorney. I'm a corporate attorney. I represent tech companies, startups, investment funds. And John?
I'm Jonathan Jackson. I'm an entrepreneur, operator, writer, strategist. I focus on helping people build flywheels, narrative infrastructure, and business operations.
Cool. So today we're going to talk about the value of your IP, how to protect it, and all of the different business structures that you can put together, either using your IP or around your IP, that not only ensures that you're good money, but also ensures that you can build it for growth. So I guess we should start with what IP is. IP is value that increases or decreases based on a plethora of things. And what matters is how you have it structured. So think of a piece of IP as something that you create. If you decide to put words on a piece of paper, that's your IP. If you decide to turn the camera on and record yourself, that's your IP. If you decide to draw something on paper, that's your IP. You sing on a beat, that's your IP. Anything that you create yourself, whether it's artistic or it's technical, that could fall under a patent. That's also a form of IP. And although it sounds very simple and clear cut, but we see IP everywhere. IP is Mickey Mouse. IP is Pikachu. IP is Drake's last soundtrack. IP is the Uber algorithm, right? IP is everywhere and we interact with it every day. And because it's that important, you should treat it that way, because if you're a creator, you're creating IP on the regular.
Hold on. So IP is intellectual property, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so what makes it property, though? Because everything you talked about makes sense. But if it's in the world and I made it, how do I own it?
So there's a bunch of different ways you can own your IP. And the way IP is broken down, it's either a patent, a trademark, or a copyright. So if it's something that you wrote down in a book, that's a copyright. That's usually something written. It's copyrightable. If it's a logo, let's say something you designed, that would fall under what we will call a trademark.
Right.
Typically, it's like a name, right? And then if it's something very technical, let's say like an algorithm, or let's say it's a very unique type of lock that you would enter your key in, that would probably fall under what they call a patent, right?
Okay.
So those are the 3 different types of IP. Now, the reason why it's called property is because it's something that's yours. It's something that you took as an element and reformatted into something that they call novel or different than that currently existed in the marketplace before you did that particular act.
So it's a new imagination of something that could have existed. So I could take something that used to exist, put a different spin on it, and then it becomes my IP?
Yes. And that it becomes your IP because of your particular contribution to it.
Okay. How different does it need to be to avoid me just stealing it? Like if I took that shirt and just changed the color from navy to lighter blue, did that make it my IP?
Well, technically speaking, yes.
Okay.
Now, if you decided to keep this particular logo on that shirt, then technically it's not, because this logo that's on this shirt actually belongs to Aimé Leon Dore,
Right.
and that's their IP. So you
Okay.
cannot just make this a whole different color and then decide to still use their logo, because that logo is their IP, and they filed this logo with the USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office.
So that would be infringement,
yes,
that
that
would
would be trademark infringement,
which is illegal.
which is fully illegal, and they will sue your pants off.
All right, heard you. Say less.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the thing with ALD, the way they've been able to increase the value of their IP is by releasing more novel, new types of clothing with this logo or any other logo that they've registered with the USPTO,
Mhm.
and the value that they've assigned to their creations, right? So,
Right.
ALD comes out with a new capsule collection. They either do a spring, spring, summer, or fall, winter drop.
Mhm.
They set a price to it. They style it a particular way. All of the styling is usually their creation,
Right.
right? And they assign values to all the articles of clothing. That in its own right, along with the story, the brand guidelines, the styling guidelines, the story that they've built around this brand, actually creates a value for that IP,
Mhm.
right? For that
Mhm.
intellectual property.
Okay.
And that's the opportunity that a lot of creators have today. They don't necessarily have to go into clothing, but they can do it differently, whether they're creating videos, whether they're creating written material, whether they're using their brand name to go and decide to create new products,
Right.
right? This is the opportunity that they have available today. So,
Okay.
so when you think about it that way, it's something that's really important, and it's something that should really, really, really be protected.
So I guess then because I think part of the challenge that I see is that IP is talked about so frequently, but it's not protected rigorously. So it seems like everyone's like, yo, I want to own my own IP, but we're not actually talking about tangibly what does that mean? Because there's the reality of what your IP is in the world, and then there's the structure required to protect it. And so I think in this episode, it's important to explain the difference between what it is to hold your IP well and then to protect it. So how do you make sure you can transact with it, but that it's actually still safe?
Yeah. So I guess we could kind of dig into um how to protect the IP first,
Right.
and then we'll move into how to transact with it. So typically and historically, when an artist goes and makes something, no matter what it is, they they create it, and then they go about their business, right? And they claim the right to their creation
Mhm.
personally, right? And that's fine and dandy until you're at last lap with your girlfriend and some dude is trying to holler at her and you smack the daylight out of him, right?
Right.
And he sues you for battery.
Uh-huh.
And when he sues you for battery and gets a judgment in
Yeah.
civil court from the judge,
Right.
and he says, well, you smacked me so hard that I can't see out my left eye,
Mm-hmm.
then now you owe him $250,000
Sure.
so that he could get
LASIK.
LASIK or something.
Yeah.
But you don't have $250,000 in cash,
Tough.
and you don't have any other assets. He's coming after your IP
Because of the judgment.
because of the judgment and because you personally own this IP,
Mm.
right? As an artist, as a creator,
Mhm.
right? So what you do is, if you're smart, you go and you file a company, whether it's a limited liability company or what most folks online call an LLC,
Right.
or you go and you file a C corporation. And what you do is you put that IP in that entity
Right.
so that you could walk around freely smacking people.
Uh-huh.
You shouldn't be smacking people.
Right, right,
I
right.
just want to make sure that people know not to smack nobody after this episode.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, you can walk around freely now knowing that your IP is safe from smacking people.
Yeah.
Now, when you have it in this entity, you should actually put the rest of your IP in that same entity. And that entity should operate as a holding company for your assets, for your intellectual property assets.
Okay.
Period. So if you're going and you're filing for a trademark because you've created a logo for the brand that's associated with you, you should file that trademark under the LLC that you own. And you
Mhm.
should be the majority owner of that LLC.
Mhm.
And you should make sure that you write a very thorough operating agreement for that LLC so that you can ensure that you retain ownership and that if something happens to you, that it gets passed over to your family.
Right.
That's how you protect your IP. Now, if we're in the conversation of transacting with your IP,
Yeah.
I think that requires a bit of detail, I feel like, because it's definitely going to vary based on what we're looking at. So,
Okay.
so I'm wondering, I do want to answer that question that you asked, specifically based on what answer you're looking for.
Okay. So what if let's say I'm an artist, so I do music, but I want to tour, I want to maybe do merch, and I'm thinking about like collabs. I want to be more communal. Like if I have my IP, so right, my recordings, even my logo for the merch, should I have a holding company? Should it be like a separate LLC? Should it be just like a gang of LLCs and they talk to each other? Like what do I do?
Yeah. So for this particular example, if you're an artist, and there's so many different types of artists, but for this context, we're gonna say it's music,
Yeah.
right? So you're a musician, and you own all your masters, you own all of that, right? You also create a bunch of logos and stuff, so you have all of that also in your LLC. All of that is protected in that one entity. Now, if you want to create a clothing brand specifically, right? What you're going to do is you're going to actually create an operating company just for the clothing brand itself.
Mm-hmm.
And what you would do is you would license the particular IP that you want that clothing brand to carry you would create a licensing agreement from your holding company to the entity that's operating the clothing brand. So basically, it's almost like you're lending to yourself
Mm-hmm.
access to your IP. And the formal legal definition for that is a licensing agreement, which
Okay.
is what you see a lot of your favorite artists do. Like what they tend to do is they license their name, image, and likeness to other entities for collaborations, for brands that they create themselves. And the reason why they do that is because a bunch of things can happen when you're running a clothing line, right? A clothing business. You can say, all right, guys, I'm dropping this new capsule collection. It's alpaca. You sell it, and some kid buys it, and that kid's skin is allergic to alpaca. And now they break out, right? And they want to sue you for selling them an item with no warning label on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your IP was inside of the clothing company,
Mm-hmm.
your IP would be at risk of litigation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if that kid won, they would want to bleed your bank account and whatever's left. And if the IP is in that whatever's left, they're coming for that IP too.
Right.
So now what you get to tell the judge, you get to say, hey, Your Honor, well, no IPs in this entity, just money from selling alpaca clothes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all they get. They just get that. That's all they've got. Then they say, well, what about the logo you was using? And you get to say, hey, that was under a licensing agreement with a separate entity. So that IP doesn't fall under the scope of assets that this particular person can get a judgment on.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. So if I'm thinking about the IP I have and then doing things with it, it makes more sense to actually license it to another entity as opposed to just doing it out of one singular entity,
Right.
because that would expose me to potential liabilities or issues, because wherever I'm transacting from is where the issues could come from. So the structure of what I put things in matters just as much as what I make.
Right. And there's a bunch of examples in the marketplace that we have. But I like to use Drake as the best example.
Of course you do.
Last year, during the whole battle situation, folks are doing some diligence on Drake, and they found that Drake has 52 companies in which he is either a full owner, or he is a majority or minority stakeholder in, right? And in all of these companies, I want to actually pull up some of the names. So Frozen Moments LLC is an entity that Drake owns, and that's typically the entity that he keeps all of his IP in. That's all the masters that he owns, that he has full ownership over. That's the one that he transacts with. But then Drake has Drake Related LLC, Away from Home Solutions LLC, More Life Investments LLC, Graham ADG Investments LLC, ADG Vanguard IP LLC, right? Then he has other corporations, which my assumption here is that they're C corporations. He has Nocta Freehold Inc., Dream Crew Holding Inc., ADG Songs Inc., right? So what it sounds like to me is that Drake is using a lot of these entities to perform particular things. So if you hear that Drake has entered into a new deal with some new entity, let's say he enters a deal with Nike, he's probably using Nocta Freehold Inc. as the entity with Nike instead of Drake, right? Because if Nike wants to sue Drake himself, that means the embassy in Toronto is at stake. And that's the assumption. My assumption is that the embassy in Toronto is in Drake's name, but it's probably also under some sort of entity, whether it's an LLC or a C Corp, or just a proper entity that's under Canadian jurisdiction.
Right. So, okay, let's switch form for a second. So let's say I'm not a musician, but I'm a creator. Let's say I'm in health and wellness, and I'm about to do my first ever expedition. I'm gonna go hike Kilimanjaro, and I got to get ready for it. I got to train, but it's an opportunity for me to actually invite sort of potentially new investors, collaborate with brands, whether they're fitness or they're outdoor. But I have structure, but I also need capital to do it. It doesn't sound like this is a holdco situation, because the thing I'm doing is temporary, but it's big enough where there could be opportunity, and I want to actually invite partners in, but I don't want to simply just give the IP of the experience away. Like what is there a structure for something like that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of influencers, they typically do transactions one of like a few ways. And a lot of them, what they do is they say, hey, look, I want to get a brand to sponsor this particular activity, right? But the issue and the difficulty with brands kind of doing that, which is why it's usually reserved to the largest influencers, the difficulty with that is that most of the people that the influencers are catering to, their audiences, I'd say probably like 40% of the time, 30% of the time, people ain't buying the products, right? They're looking at that and they're like, okay, this influencer is doing this to make money.
Right.
That's it. So we're going to click like, we're going to comment, we're going to whatever. But like, unless this particular product is actually a product we're interested in, we're probably not going to buy it. Right.
Sure.
So to me, I think that particular model is growing stale, and everyone sees that particular model going stale, and it's been going stale for a long time. So while I was in law school, I kind of came up with a different type of model that would work for influencers, specifically in that type of format that you were talking about. So So venture capitalists are basically people who invest in startups,
Mhm.
right? And when they raise money, they usually raise it, they call it a fund, right? And that fund raises, let's say, $1 billion, and then they deploy that capital to these tech companies that they invest in with hopes that these tech companies blow up and they get to take that money home and return it to their investors.
Mhm.
And the entity that they use to do this is called a limited partnership. It's an LP. It's usually a Delaware limited partnership. And the way the structure of that entity goes is that there is a general partner, and that general partner is usually the VC person, the person who's raising the money, saying they're going to deploy the capital. And then there's limited partners, and those limited partners are the investors,
Mhm.
right? So, for me, the way I viewed it, I was like, yo, why don't we just use this for creators?
Mm.
And this is like 2018 when I came up with this idea. But basically, in short, like what you could do is you can have the artist be the general partner
Mm.
in their particular entity. I would always advise for them to create a new entity to
Mhm.
play the general partner,
Right.
but that new entity would be the artist's representation in a general partnership. And then the limited partners could be one, a brand that wants to make an investment in that artist for some level of exclusivity, or in this particular instance, your friend who wants to do this particular activity.
Mhm.
They can invest and have exclusivity in that, right?
In the project.
In the project. So your friend is wearing Patagonia
Uh-huh.
the whole time,
Right.
and that's the only thing they're wearing.
Got you.
But that's part of Patagonia's investment, and it's not a brand payment, it's an investment in it. And this is why I'm using the word investment very specifically, because Patagonia is making an investment, so they're only wearing Patagonia. But then your friend is probably friends with LeBron, right? And LeBron loves this idea and thinks that they could put together a really cool documentary, and this documentary would be awesome. So LeBron decides to put some money in. LeBron's now an LP with Patagonia. And then a beverage brand could decide that they want to be an LP as well,
Mm.
right? And maybe they'll create a special bottle, or maybe they'll always make sure that this person gets helicoptered cases while they're climbing a mountain, right?
Right.
But they also make an investment in this thing, and it's only about the project. So the project, let's say the project is supposed to produce a documentary, they'll only have ownership of this documentary, but nothing else that's part of your friend's IP outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
They only have ownership over the IP in that particular project that's in the limited partnership.
Can the limited partners take different amounts of ownership in the project?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it will be determined based on how much they invested in a limited partnership and for what points. So you could say it's 20% or 10% or 30%
Right.
based on what their contributions to the limited partnership is.
Mhm.
But remember, the creative freedom will still be in the hands of the artist because they're going to be the general partner.
Mm.
And the general partner gets to do what they have to do creatively because they're the person who's steering the ship on the creative project. So
that's an operating agreement thing then, because
well, it's not specifically an operating agreement. It's called a limited partnership agreement, an LPA.
what's the difference?
Well, the difference is that an operating agreement is specifically for LLCs, and LPAs are for limited partnerships, and they typically have different terms. And from a statutory perspective, they're looked at differently by each state.
Mm-hmm.
So limited partners in a limited partnership have different rights than members of a limited liability company.
Like what?
So, for example, members in a limited liability company have audit rights, right? Statutorily, they have audit rights. But in a limited partnership agreement, that's something that has to be negotiated.
Audit, like they can look inside of
Inside
the
the books.
financials of
Yeah.
of whatever the company is.
Right. Right.
That's like just a mandatory thing they usually
So for
have.
LLCs, members have it off rip. It's a statutorily protected. It's a statutorily protected right.
Right.
But in an LPA, that's typically contracted.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, the statute doesn't give limited partners the right off rip. Instead, you have to contract it in the LPA.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's a project and it's a one-off, they're not necessarily concerned with that because you know what you're getting because it's a
Right.
project. It's not an entity.
Right.
Okay.
Which is why they're very different, right? The LLC is something that's supposed to have a longer duration of time,
Right.
but a fund it typically has a shorter lifeline.
Mm-hmm.
Usually funds exist for about 10 years from a venture perspective,
Sure.
right? So the assumption is that if you're working on a project, that project is going to live in a shorter lifeline,
Uh-huh.
right? So, a fund will last 10 years, but maybe your project's going to last 2 years,
Uh-huh.
right? So as a result, there's not as many statutorily codified rights for those people of that type of entity versus an LLC, which has a longer lifeline.
Okay. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What other formats could you use as a creator if because not everybody wants to be Disney, but some people actually might have that ambition that they actually want to create sort of something that's multi-generational in terms of duration, that has sub corporations attached to it. Like, what kind of structures are there if you're actually building something to scale in this environment? Because it sounds like you have sort of the artist holdco. That makes sense. You've got the LP model and structure. That makes sense. Are there other things that could hold IP, like a C Corp itself? Like, how does that work relative to an LLC?
Yeah. So C corporations typically are entities that exist for scale.
Right.
Typically your largest corporations are probably like C corps. Disney's probably a C corp,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the reason why they're that large is because those entities are made for hundreds, if not thousands, of investors. Delaware C corps are usually the ones that are used for this particular purpose. Now they're opening up now other companies are favoring other states as of late, but Delaware is still like the national standard.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the reason why it's a national standard is because investors have a lot of rights to and the executives have a lot of responsibilities to the investors. That's the reason why they love Delaware.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of law there. There's been a lot of fights there. And the Court of Chancery is basically the Supreme Court of corporate activity.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of setting the standard. They're not the Supreme Court,
Right.
obviously. The Supreme Court of the United States, they're not that. But typically, if you're a person who's looking to actually build something as large as Disney, you'll set up a C corp, and what you'll do is you'll make sure you get all the proper documentation you need so that you can get the proper investment so that you can do that, right? And typically, it'll be a C corp. You'll have what they call an intellectual property assignment agreement, which means that all the IP that you're going to create as the CEO of this company is going to go to the company,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you have any existing IP that you would like to contribute to that entity, you would list that in your intellectual property assignment agreement as well. Along that, you'll also have to hire yourself, and you'll probably need a simple agreement in future equity, which basically is an agreement that you give to investors before you actually grow to a level where you convert them into shareholders. And then you'll need tons and tons and tons and tons of other paperwork because you're just so big. And if you're going to IPO someday like Disney, you'll have to go through that whole regulatory process
Mm-hmm.
with the federal and some state governments.
Okay. So it sounds like we have structures that are ideal for IP and the movement of IP. So from an artist or musician perspective, where IP is essentially a day one activity if you're making songs or making art. And then you have this LP model for short-term projects like a tour, like a event series, like a festival that has a clear start and end date, where you could actually have partnerships involved that are not taking IP, but are taking portions of that singular event or moment.
Yeah.
And there's an agreed to start and stop and very clear outcomes that works on.
Yeah, and the beauty of that second model that we spoke about, the limited partnership model, is that, I don't know, from my perspective, I believe that brands actually can make more money. And the reason why I think brands can make more money is because brands are not throwing their money away at an influencer and then like hoping that people buy stuff. Instead, what they're doing is they're actually taking equity in the IP that's being created out of that particular project. Which means, let's say if we're talking about a festival, like a brand would get a piece of the profits from that festival, even if they didn't make sales, right? For their particular brand, right? So like a brand, and that's typically why brands always have like sour tastes in their mouths, right? Because they were hoping that if you wore Lululemon, that people would buy more Lululemon. But like maybe you're not a yoga person, right? So like, yes, you got a lot of followers, but people aren't looking at you to buy yoga products. So as a result, people aren't buying the Lululemon units. But like if Lululemon owned a piece of your 10-city yoga tour, let's say if you did that in collaboration with, let's say you did it in collaboration with the biggest yoga studio in New York City, and they owned a piece of it. Even if Lululemon didn't move any units, they would still own a piece of the tour. So if they owned a piece of the tour, they would at least be able to recoup their initial investment and maybe even leave with a little bit more, right? Which is why like I made that model that way, because it allows influencers and brands and creators to actually work together in a way that everybody gets to eat on, right? And then at the end of the day, also, it creates something that is repeatable, because it forces creators to actually go and create bigger and better things and be more ambitious and have access to capital to do that. And many companies already have like venture, they have venture funds. So, instead of them actually putting money in, as much tech as they do, they would also just put the money behind creators.
If the structure is there.
If they have the structure, yeah. So you, as a creator, you would have to call a lawyer to put together an LP model, make you the GP, make them the LP, draw up a really good LPA, and Lululemon could send you an investment wire as part of that fund.
Because the actual investment is for the thing you're making, not necessarily into the person who's making it.
Precisely. It's in the project. It's not in the person. So the risk is limited, right? Because we see that this happens with creators all the time where, let's say if you're a brand and you're sending wires to a creator, right? You're sending wires to a creator, they're doing their thing, and then they crash out. Creators crash out all the time. Right? So like if they're gonna crash out as a brand, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I invested so much money in the creator, right? The IP just lost $1 bazillion of value. We're cooked. And we're deeply, deeply, deeply associated with this creator, right? So like instead you could just limit your risk to a project and still recoup a piece of the project's earnings.
It's also interesting if the creator themselves, they work in something that's sort of less brand safe or maybe on the edge, or something that is sort of, it's funny because things that are cringe are either early in culture or late in culture.
Right.
So someone's like either too early or you're too late and everyone's like, ugh. But it sounds like in a model like this, you could actually take the kind of risks that you profess to want to take without having to deal with the massive headache of someone actually just having too much for Loco,
yeah,
and going nuts one night.
Yeah.
So you can actually create almost like a moat around the thing you want to test. You don't violate an autonomy. You can actually deploy capital and have an agreement where you know exactly what the alignment is, and there's incentives that are structured collectively. So
Yeah.
no one is sort of incentivized to be a bad actor for no reason.
Precisely. And the interesting part about it all is that if you could deploy capital silently, you don't even have to do it in this like, yo, I just received investment from such and such. They might just say, yo, we want to deploy capital silently on this. We want to own a piece of it. We want to see how you do it. Right. Sure, we'll give you a free supply of our products as well in this project. That'd be great if you gave it out for free to everybody. Right.
Mhm.
But like, they don't have to be an official sponsor. They could just deploy the capital silently and eat a piece off of it.
This is like how pension funds just operate
Yeah.
generally, or university endowments
Yeah.
who are massive investors in large blue chip VC funds that like you wouldn't know because of how they think about their responsibility to their shareholders. They are interested in playing long-term games, so they're looking at the entire life cycle of not just the fund but the actual firm. And so the value of the LP relationship is that they re-up off from fund 1 to fund 2 to fund 3. And so there's a vintage almost model of like, we were early and we had conviction. So you could play that same game.
And in that particular space, like what tends to happen is the early folks get side letters, right? So what they do is they just always get better terms in new funds. They always get better terms. There's always a side letter for them. So they run around telling you, yeah, the price is 2.20. That pension fund who was super early is getting 1% management fee, and they're probably getting 10%. And the VC fund is probably getting 10% on a return instead of 20%. Right.
Interesting.
So like, they're always getting preferable terms because of taking that risk early. And as an artist, you can do the same thing with a brand, right? Like, let's say if you're trying this festival thing year 1 and that brand decides, hey, look, we're not gonna like be a sponsor because you're trying this for the first time and that's too risky, but we do believe in you as a person and we think this idea is really good. We're gonna slug you silently and take a piece of this. But what we want is, if this thing kicks off and does well, we want sponsorship rights when you decide to do it. And yes, we're going to cut a check to be a formal sponsor. And that's not going to be something that you have to return capital on. But we want sponsorship rights if this blows up, because we know that if it does blow up, that our competitors are going to want sponsorship rights on it. And they're going to cut you probably a bag just as big as us, or maybe bigger. So we also want to like actually
limit their exposure.
Yeah, we want to lock in a good price and be good money on it. You know what I mean? So these are some really creative ways that you can actually structure deals with brands that actually can return capital and limit their brand exposure.
And you can do this with people, right? So this is another interesting element of the model, is that if my friend is starting something, if this agreement is done well, I can be their first LP, and I don't have to. I am investing in them, but I'm actually investing in their project.
Yeah.
So I don't have to have the risk of just giving them the money personally. I can actually give the money to the thing they were doing.
Right.
So then their incentive is aligned to the creation, completion, and execution of the project, as opposed to me just wiring them money.
Yeah.
And hoping that they execute.
Right.
Which is how every friendship dissolves.
I don't want peace. I want problems always.
Precisely. And it's interesting because, you know, the risk is on the other side too, right? Where you say, hey, okay, let's say I'm going to invest in you as a creator. I'm going to invest in your holding company, in your LLC, right? Like, you know, maybe you gave them $5,000, but you gave them $5,000 for like 20% of their LLC, right? but like they turn into Mr. Beast. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, yo, like that's, come on, right? Like you're actually, everybody in the room understands that they literally got too much for too little.
Mm-hmm.
But like, obviously, if you're thinking about economic incentives, the one person that gave the $5,000 for 20% is like, well, that's what you agreed to.
Mm-hmm.
So I want my $20,000 of your billion.
Yeah.
I mean, I want the 20% of your billion,
Right.
right? But then on the other side, Mr. Beast is like, yo, bro, like, you know how many different iterations from back then I am,
Yeah.
right? So like, the LP model actually just gets to hold everybody up to a particular period of time. It limits risk on both sides,
Mm-hmm.
and it allows folks to prove. So it's like, all right, cool. You did amazing on this project. You returned capital, right? So, you know, one, what are you doing next? And two, like, do you want me to actually deploy additional capital to something else? And you can have a separate conversation about that,
Mm-hmm.
right? But at the very least, everything's limited to that particular project or that activity.
Cool. Are there any new? A lot of these are sort of iterations on old standing models or things that have been sort of reconditioned or reimagined. Are there new models that are out there? Are there new things that like people are developing? Because these things came into being somehow. So are there like new things for the moment that we're in?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of new stuff happening. And it's really cool to see it happening. So in the last, I'd say 10 years, maybe 15 years, we've had the Public Benefit Corporation created, or the Benefit Corporation, B Corp. You probably heard about it. A lot of companies are walking around saying they're B Corps because public benefit corporations, or B Corps, are basically companies that, as part of their profit incentive, they also have an incentive to do good, and they make it a part of their mission to do good. So like, just like, um, if you're a standard C corporation and you could sue a CEO for not maximizing shareholder value, like you can also sue a CEO under the B Corp model. You could sue a CEO for not living up to their model or their mission. So if their mission is to give free shoes in Africa, if they haven't given one shoe to Africa in 2 years, you could be like, yo, you're actually going against something that's statutorily mentioned in Delaware statute. But on top of that, it's in your like initial investment docs. It's in your
Mhm.
initial corporate docs. You're going against your corporate bylaws,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we can sue you for breaching that as an investor.
Mm-hmm.
So those are public benefit corporations, and a lot of them are out there. Actually, my former managing partner was one of the people who like put together the Public Benefit Corporation. He was one of the first writers to actually advocate first for different states to actually codify them. So now I think they're in like 40 or 50 states, all 50 at this point. You can make a public benefit corporation in New York, Delaware, Maryland. You could do them in California. So that's really good because, you know, this whole idea of capitalism, folks are like, corporations only exist to do bad things. That's all they do. And now that we have something that can hold like executives accountable, it's good to see. So our hope is that obviously companies will be doing better as they move forward. Now, something that's super, super, super on the fringe that I'm really excited is the A Corp, the Artist Corporation, which is the brainchild of Yancey Strickler. Yancey Strickler is a co-founder of Kickstarter, and he actually did a TED talk on the A Corp. And his whole idea is taking the best parts of all types of corporate structures that exist. So he wants the best of the LLC, the best of the C Corp, the best of a nonprofit, and the best of an S Corp. And he wants the best of all of these to operate for the artists. And that's because artists need a better entity for them to house their IP, and artists need actually a more collaborative type of entity structure that works for intellectual property specifically and not just monetary gain or not just for capital, if that makes any sense.
So in this model, it sounds like the artists can formalize the value of their IP from the beginning as opposed to having it measured by the market.
Yeah, so to kind of break down that question that you had, so when you put together an LLC with you and 5 friends, and you're putting together an operating agreement, there's a section in an operating agreement that has what they call a member schedule. And that member schedule asks for your name, address, how to contact you. They ask you for how much equity you have or how many membership units you have. And then they ask you for what your capital contribution is. And like 100% of the time, the legally binding or the perspective that a court is looking for or what they're looking for to fill that slot is some sort of dollar amount. So they're looking for you to say, I contributed $10,000. That's why I got 50%, right? But that doesn't necessarily exist for IP that doesn't have a value yet. You can't say my brand instead of $10,000 because your brand and that value is subjective. So in the current space that we're living in, a lot of our investments are capital driven and a lot of our contributions are capital driven. But from my understanding of what Yancey Strickler is looking for in building the Artist Corporation or the A Corp is that he wants the ability for people's IP contributions to actually have the same value as money or capital contributions. He wants them to actually be one and the same, right? And that's actually interesting and exciting to see because between parties, right, between people who are setting up a company, they know how valuable the IP is to the company, right? Like if you are the best cartoonist that I know and I'm trying to make the new version of Cartoon Network, I know how valuable your IP is to this corporation, right? And if I'm the person who wrote SpongeBob SquarePants, you also know the value of my physical writing, right? But we both haven't created the thing yet because we're just putting together this structure so that we can formalize our work. So our IP has value, but it hasn't been realized as of yet because it hasn't been created, right? So from my perspective, at least, reading through all of Yancey's work, watching his TED Talk, it looks to me that he's trying to create an entity where artists are able to do that without having some sort of monetary US dollar amount attached to that activity, because we do know how valuable creativity is. But the issue with creativity is that it's not as tangible as dollars are.
It's interesting because I think that this is one of the challenges that is persistent we have a lot of conversations about AI, automation, what's going to stand, what's going to matter. But because artistry is a act of faith in many respects, when you start to talk about what is it worth, it is deeply subjective in terms of the permanence. Like no one's asking what is the Sistine Chapel worth, right? No one is like, man, I wonder if Kehindley Wiley is making valuable work, right? Like that's not the conversation. And even when you see one sell, you're like, wow, it sold for X, but that actually doesn't change the value of what he made or what he did or how he made that come to life. And so I think an artist corporation is interesting because this is the kind of thing, had it existed, I think there's different conversations that would be happening around people who never got the opportunity that we know they needed, or artists that were valuable, but they had to choose between investment and integrity. And so like the structure, even the legal element of that, policy has to catch up to culture. It's never in reverse.
Yeah.
So what Yancey's doing is interesting because what he's saying is in this environment, we need a new paradigm, and it needs to be actually policy. It can't just be vibes.
Right.
So like he's trying to make this the A Corp form that you can, if you're on Northwest registered agent, it's one of the selection criteria, which requires state legislation, national legislation, people writing policy, legal scholars, artists, operators, right? That's like, it takes a coalition in the same way the PBC came together. Like people have to decide that this is actually a sea change and that it's not just worthwhile, but important.
Yeah, it's the thing that we're also seeing happen, that Yancey is also seeing happen, is that the new resource is creativity. Like that is the new like creativity is like oil. Creativity is like gold. Creativity is like plastic, right? Like it's a natural resource, but that natural resource comes from human beings. And we've seen the effect of that natural resource and how it has affected humanity, right? And how it's actually helped humanity move forward. But we've only made limited strides in codifying or protecting that level of creativity, right? It's why we have, in terms of IP law, we're like, hey, we can take that and structure it and make it an asset.
Right.
If we put it inside of a company, it could be a tradable asset, right? But in terms of the creation of it, the point in time when it doesn't necessarily fully exist in its rawest form, and the rawest form is when it's in your brain. That's what the rawest form of creativity is. We haven't been able to create a legal structure that protects that, right? Or that represents the value of that, right?
Without putting dollar on it.
Without putting a dollar on it. And what Yancey, in my opinion, is doing is he's saying, hey, like, let's actually see if we can allow that to happen, but amongst artists at this stage, amongst artists, right? But the interesting thing, and that's why I'm really excited about it, is I want to see how, because it doesn't fully exist yet, right? And he's advocating and putting together a team for people to advocate for this on a state and on a federal level, right? So like what I'm excited to see also is what the rights that these artists are going to have inside of the entity as owners of the entity, and like what rights are the shareholders going to have, right? Because he's making an entity that can be run by artists for artists, but supported by outside investors. So like an investor will be able to invest in an A Corp and own a piece of it, but they won't own the IP, but they'll own a piece of the profit or the revenue that comes from that structure, right? The A Corp also will be able to take grants from nonprofits, right? And as a result of that, that's usually typically reserved only for nonprofit organizations, unless it's a for-profit grant that's like given by like the state or something. Usually grants are for nonprofits. That's usually where they go. But he wants to create an entity that can accept that, because one of the most important things about artistry is patronage, right?
Yeah.
So he wants that to stay. He wants them to have the ability to have and a treasury for all the artists to have access to. He wants them to have insurance so that they can pay for health insurance for themselves, right? So all of these are going to live inside of this entity, and all of the artists are going to be what he calls members. But although we have the flow chart, but it's going to be interesting to see who has rights to what. Like, how does this look legally from a statutory perspective? Because every state gives rights to people who are inside of these entities. Like, members of an LLC have rights. Shareholders of a C corporation have shareholder rights. So because these people have rights, what are the rights that the artists are going to have on a state level, right? And that's also going to make a determination to where people decide to file. Because if an artist has more rights in California through the California A Corp than they do in the Delaware A Corp, then most folks are going to file in California instead of Delaware, right? So, but if investors have more rights in the A Corp in Delaware, they might say, well, in order for you to receive an investment from me, you need to be a Delaware A Corp, not a California A Corp.
Yeah.
Right? So these things are going to be interesting to see how they develop. But to me, I think the future for creatives, for creators in general, is really bright, because what this tells me is that the marketplace itself, not only the fact that legally these things are happening, that means financially they've either been happening or they're brewing heavily, and people are seeing the marketplace shift and change toward these folks. So they're trying to figure out, like, hey, one, how do we protect them, but also how do we get more capital in their hands?
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm optimistic too. I think for a long time there's been this false dichotomy between you sort of like being an artist and making money. And I think that varies, depending on industry. There's this idea called the power law, which is sort of based on the Pareto principle, right? So like 80% of what you see happen comes from 20% of the effort. Power law essentially says that if you were to look at sort of VC, for instance, right, you see 80% of the take home from 20% of the firms, or you see, like on YouTube, you see 80% of the interest coming from 20% of the creators. And I think the creator economy has a power law. Media has a power law. There are outsized actors that are often referenced as examples that are actually not the example of the messy middle, right? The middle class, if you will, of creators that are doing really well, growing, want to make a sustainable income, take care of their people, and love what they do. And I think that requires structure. That requires policy. That requires public-private partnerships, and it requires sovereignty, so that you have an artist who wants to take a risk, and you have the ability for that risk to be capitalized well with the right kind of capital, right? And so I think sometimes when we think about not all money is created equal. What I mean by that is some capital is not patient. Some capital needs a return. Other capital, and oftentimes philanthropic, the incentive of where that money comes from is not looking to beat the S&P. So that there's a longer headway, which is why they can be attractive, but they're hard to get, which can make them unattractive. And so if you don't know who you know, everything has a network effect. So I think what Yancey's trying to do, and I think what we're trying to talk about, is this idea of structure as an opportunity and not as a boogeyman, right? Carl just spent almost an hour as a practicing lawyer talking about what it means to think about this from the perspective of an artist that has intellectual property, a creator that's making something, whether that be streaming university like Kai Cenat, which is IP, whether that be a show on Patreon, whether that be, a hiking expedition, or whether that be a 1v1 tournament that you're doing in your neighborhood that you're actually deciding to film and made a logo for it. Those things all equal out across the layer of IP. They might be different types of intellectual property, but they are all owned and operated by the person who made them. And so I guess my hope and my ambition for this episode is that people can see structure as a thing that is for them, structure as an opportunity to build something distinct, and structure as a thing you have not just a right to, but I would say you should have a conviction towards if you're trying to be out here and build something sustainable and something that you can continue to profit off of and that is investable. Because that's the other thing that I think Yancey has done really well is to think about art has always been investable. The kind of investor is changing.
Yeah.
And we didn't even really talk about kind of, like the tokenization opportunity or the Web3 implications of being able to tokenize IP and having that live on the ledger, which makes it interoperable, which means you can always know who purchased your art and you can always have a chain of provenance. Like there's a whole world that this structure enables that is coming online that, I think we want people to know about and to feel empowered that you don't have to be a lawyer to get started. You actually just may need support to actually get it to completion. But like the structure is approachable, it's accessible, and it's achievable.
Yeah, like to me, I think the opportunity is enormous. And it's interesting. Lawyers get a bad rap out here, bro. They get a really bad rap because most of the time folks see lawyers doing like one particular thing.
Cellino and Barnes.
You know what I'm saying? Cellino and Barnes, Better Call Saul, like those are the types of folks they see lawyers play a role as. But like I think the money/return on the paperwork I send out consistently has to be like, if it was for $1, like if we were to say every piece of paper that I ship from my office is worth $1, the return is like $1,000 for every person, like every piece of paper I ship. So like if I make you a safe agreement, you're probably going to raise millions of dollars on that safe agreement, but you're going to pay like $1,500 for it. Right? And I create that context because most folks look at lawyers as a place where as a sinkhole where you put your money and never get it back. But like the paperwork, the structures that people are putting together for you, the returns on those are so crazy based on your execution. It's insane. So it actually makes more sense for you to, at the very least, get your lawyer on the phone and talk to them about what it is that you want done. And they don't necessarily even have to do it, but at least having a conversation with them so that they can give you some sort of guidance actually like yields such a high return for you that like it can actually turn something that you just had an idea of into millions of dollars. And it actually works the other way, where it's like a lawyer being in the room or you talking to that lawyer before making that decision can actually save you millions of dollars, right? Like you could have said, hey, yeah, like I just started my LP fund and I'm going to da-da-da-da. And yeah, I made everybody sign the papers. And you're like, hey, did you check to see if they're accredited investors? Because if the SEC finds out that you're doing that and you're not checking if they're accredited investors, they will clean you completely out. Did you check that? And like that one question actually could save you millions of dollars, right? And it's just a form that you have to make sure people fill out, right, themselves, right? But like that one form, that one piece of paper, that hour, 2 hours that you spent with your attorney actually saves you a couple M's, or vice versa. That structure that they put together that costed you a certain amount of money actually yields you like 10 or $20 million, right? So if you're gonna take this game that you're playing seriously, you know that the money's there the money's out there for you. You know that folks are innovating in that space, and you know there's people like Yancey that's putting together innovative structures so that you can go out there and do cool things. Your lawyer's on your side too, you know? So that's part of my hope throughout this conversation, that folks just realize like, oh wait, hold on, like the lawyers aren't people that we throw money away to. Instead, like they're people we make investments in. So that's my hope.
Well, there you have it. We just got an hour and free legal advice from Carl. So we're up.
Wait. Hold on. Yo, this is not legal advice. This is not legal advice. This is for purely entertainment value. You get legal advice from your lawyer. That's who you get legal advice from. All right?
Yeah, that's why I'm not a lawyer. All right, so this is not legal advice. Carl just gave us an hour of entertainment. I'm Jonathan. This is Carl. You know what the vibes are out here. Don't follow us. Don't follow a scammer. Follow the money.
Follow the money.
But I started to think about what if we could create a new structure for a project like ours, and actually a new structure for creative work, period. With Kickstarter, I had some experience of seeing how public benefit corporations were made a law. This is a PBC, not a B Corp. That's another story. And seeing how something like that became a law and like that new possibility was made. So I reached out to someone I knew who knows a lot of interesting people, and soon we were talking to all these lawyers, and lawyers who had made new corporate forms before, and lawyers who had made the PBC before. And for the past year, I've been working on this project to try to develop this new structure for creative work. And it will become public more widely next month. But excited to talk about it a bit today. And we call it the Artist Corporation. And you could think of the Artist Corporation as like a company, as like a C Corp, except it's made specifically for how creative people do things. So we could imagine that there's a band, and to start, they have an artist corp right from the beginning. And so from the beginning, they're not just 5 individuals, they're collective owners of a project that has the right to own their songs, that can own their gear, manage their affairs, that when they start to get paid, that money can automatically flow to members according to preset splits, or be saved into a treasury for future projects, or to be used to get access to better health care or other benefits.